All right, good afternoon and welcome everybody. My name is Emily Bell. I'm the communications coordinator for the Florida Wildflower Foundation. Thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar, Creating a Colorful Native World Inside an HOA. We'd love for you to pop in the chat and let us know where you're joining us from today. For those of you not familiar with our organization, our mission is to protect, connect, and expand native wildflower habitats through education, research, planting, and conservation. Our work is made possible primarily through the sales and renewals of the Florida State Wildflower License Plate, and these funds, along with donations and memberships, allow us to support and create projects that build awareness and knowledge of native wildflowers and plants throughout Florida. That's our old plate design there, and this is the plate that has been on the road now for a number of years. We'd like to encourage those of you who find our programs valuable to consider becoming a member, making a donation, or purchasing the State Wildflower License Plate. And if you purchase or have the plate, you're eligible for a membership, so just let us know you have the tag and we'll get you set up in our database. Be sure to check out our website for resources on planting and growing wildflowers, to learn where you can see wildflowers in bloom, for upcoming events and more. We're also on social media, and you can find us on most platforms at FLA Wildflowers. Our next webinar in April will be a continuation of our Botany in Context series and coming up with Getting Familiar with Plant Families, presented by Dr. Jim Folsom. That will be on April 16th. And then part 5 and 6, you can see there, Botanical Jargon on May 21st and Using Keys to Florida Plants on June 18th. Stay tuned as well for lots of great field trips we have coming up this spring. Our next field trip is this Saturday, March 29th, to Blackwater River State Forest in Okaloosa County to visit lupine habitats and search for the endangered Froston elfin butterfly. There's still some time to sign up before registration closes at the end of the day tomorrow. We also have a field trip to River Oaks Preserve in Lee County on April 19th. So be sure to follow us on social media, subscribe to our newsletter, or check out flawildflowers.org/events to get more details and stay abreast of everything we have going on, as well as register for any opportunities that you're interested in. Before we get started, I just have a few housekeeping items. All attendees are muted with cameras off. Please submit questions using the Q&A feature at any point during the presentation. Questions will be answered at the end of the presentation as time permits, and if your question is not answered, you can submit it at info@flawildflowers.org. We do monitor the chat, but not for questions, so make sure if you have questions, you use that Q&A feature. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on our website and YouTube channel in 24 to 48 hours. When it is available, you'll receive an email from us with a link to the recording, along with a resource page and links from the webinar. So now I would like to introduce our speaker. Saumya Vanderwyst is a biomedical engineer and amateur native plant lover. She has used both her training and passion to better understand the demands of using native plants within the confines of an HOA. She has successfully presented landscape plans to her HOA 3 times, has been on the architecture review board, and is currently on the HOA board. Without further ado, I'll hand it over to Saumya, and we are very excited about this presentation today.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's really quite an honor to be able to have a chance to present to all of you. So let's go ahead and launch our way in, if that's okay with everyone. Okay. Can everyone see presentation?
Looks good.
Okay, excellent. As Emily mentioned, I'm Saumya Vanderwyst. I am a biomedical engineer, and I've had a chance to fall in love with native plants somewhat slowly, and I can explain to you why it's been an interesting journey for me to enjoy native plants, and especially here in Florida. One of the things I'd like to be sure to let you all know right now, and I apologize ahead of the time, but I do have a little bit of a cold, so if you have any problems hearing me or if my voice is starting to go, please just let the moderators know and they'll get a hold of me, and I'll be sure to try and increase my volume. All right, so here's a quick rundown of what I'm going to be presenting. It starts with the fact that I'm an engineer. So I'm an engineer, and I have learned over my years and through my training that I hate lawn. Also, that having systems that are efficient and accessible are extremely good. And if you have a system that's also self-supporting and self-maintaining, that's actually the best combination. So when I'm talking about the fact that I hate lawn, I come by it quite honestly. So the joke is that I'm from Texas, which has the humidity and temperature to grow everything, but nobody ever wants to be outside. My partner grew up in Minnesota, which has little time to grow anything, and yet everybody is outside all year long. And so it makes complete sense that we lived in Arizona for 9 years before we came to Florida. So something I want to point out is actually this image that I'm showing here, which is figure 3. This is actually a thriving Tucson desert. And the question is, what makes it thriving? Why, to most of our eyes, we see it and we think that it's bereft of all life, right? Like there's nothing there. There's nothing that could be possibly growing there. It seems very barren. Well, actually, this is how a desert can be thriving. And this is the first thing that I learned when I was in Arizona, is that soil actually can be a composite of many different types of living things. For example, you've got soil includes your saguaro, your mesquite trees, your creosote bushes. Those are the big things that you can think of that grow in the soil. You also have the things that live within the soil or on top of the soil, which are the insects, the frogs, the mammals. But then you also have what is the most powerful of this group in my mind, which is the single-celled cyanobacteria, the lichens, the algae, mosses, liverworts, so on and so forth. And it is very true that in some places, the microphytic crust actually covers more of the ground surface than do canopies of all of the things that you see on the top, right? So when we think of something as thriving, what we're actually discussing is not just what's above the soil, and not just what is supported by the things that live on the soil, but actually what exists underneath that top layer. And then that leads me into the next thing, which is, okay, we've now decided that we understand that soil is important. We understand that things that live in the soil, underneath the soil, those are all important. But how do we actually become gardeners that are able to represent the largest swatch possible? And I'm saying this with respect to, I believe that having an efficient gardening system is actually the best way to make multiple people understand that gardening can actually be comprised of and use all the things that you see around you. And I apologize if that sentence didn't come out properly, but what I'm trying to say is that in this image, I'm showing you what a perfect sun and water life cycle could look like, right? We are able to collect the sun's rays, we're able to collect the water, we're able to use the water, then the water goes and then we use it to water our plants, but the plants provide shade, which also allows us to capture water and to keep our water systems healthier. All of these make up for a really great life cycle. And an efficient gardener is one who is willing and able to use everything that's around them in order to make it easier on themselves. So to make an efficient garden, you want to look at what are your goals. You want to determine what it is that you have and also what it is that you need. Then you need to go forth and identify those small improvements that can lead to large gains. There's no reason to put in that effort unless you get something out of it that makes the most sense for you and the system that you're in. And then finally, you need to understand that if you do some present planning, you actually can reduce your overall exertion. One of the other reasons why efficiency is really necessary is for the second part of this, which is accessibility. Too often we find ourselves only thinking about gardening as something that can be done if you have your health and if you have your mobility, if you have all your senses. That actually isn't true. Instead, we need to consider that accessible gardening is available to everybody and should be available to everybody. So what are types of accessibility issues? We can think of the basics, right? Bending over seedlings, hauling those heavy hoses or your watering cans, but it comes into things like walking across uneven ground, traveling between the driveway and the yard. Is there an easy way to get from point A to point B? Plant identification. Is it something where your plants are easy to identify? Can they be identified by touch? Can they be identified by smell? Can they be identified by color? I mean, are there multiple ways to access your garden and to also make your garden more accessible? So the last part of me being an engineer and thinking that I've now discovered these amazing truths. One of these truths is that self-supporting and maintaining plants or systems are the absolute best, right? So in this particular image, I'm showing you a picture from Arizona, where in which this is how I learned what complementary xeriscaping can actually provide. So everything that's circled right now provides shade. This is what provides mulch. This provides shelter. So that's to the birds and to the various mammals and insects. And then all of these provides food sources. So in one somewhat self-encapsulated system, which is primarily native, there are only a few non-native pieces to this particular image. We were able to actually have a comprehensive garden that was easy to maintain and also was able to provide everything I needed it to provide for both me as well as the various wildlife that I wanted to attract to the area. So the second half about me is not only am I an engineer, but I'm also a biologist. So as a biologist, I know that living organisms cause chaos. Seasonality can create beauty, and soil biology is really a keystone. So living organisms cause chaos. Figure 8 is, well, my dog who loved face planting all over my Elliot's love grass. That was her favorite place to be for the first 6 months of her life. She'd find any of my love grasses, throw herself across it bodily, and just sit on them. Well, that's chaos. Another piece of chaos is also this bee that's visiting a giant ironwood. So you have two things that are utterly under, I guess the best way to put it, they're under nobody's control. They're definitely not under my control. And yet there's so much beauty and magnificence to both of those systems, right? Despite the fact that my dog jumped on the Elliot's love grass every day of her life, that plant was able to grow and grow very well. without any problems. I mean, yeah, a few leaves were flattened, but over time it was able to recover. So just because we have a living organisms, just because they're creating chaos, doesn't mean it's a negative, right? We always have to try and find the positive. So one other thing that we have to find the positive in is in this little visitor of ours. So I was extremely excited when I realized that we had a resident gopher tortoise in our backyard. And so I thought that I was going to have a great chance to see wildlife. And then I thought, okay, well, this is wonderful. Let me see what the gopher tortoise is doing. So I followed him around for a little bit. Well, we had some beautiful wild petunia growing in our backyard, and every day I would wake up, but I would never see the flowers. And then I found out why, and it's because this very friendly visitor kept on munching on all of my wild petunias. So every morning, by the time I woke up, all of our flowers would be cleared off. Still, that's beauty. Another thing that I find extremely beautiful is seasonality. And this is where I think in Florida, and especially with the native wildflowers, you see the most amazing changes, right? So this is an image a few years apart, a couple of months, a few years and a few months apart, I should say, honestly. But one of them shows blanket flower in profusion. And then at the same time, if I left that bed alone, which is what I choose to do, we end up with lyre leaf sage also in profusion. They're both exquisite, and I had to do very little in order to support that. That is just the seasonality that comes across when you're talking about wildflowers and when you're talking about native gardening, right? We have the advantage of having various wildflowers that come into season, and we have a long enough growing season that we can show them off. So why don't we do so? Why don't we make use of the fact that we have that seasonality? Here's another part where I find seasonality creates beauty. So this is tropical sage. This image to me is extremely lovely. And part of the reason is that it has all the stages of tropical sage, right? You're not only seeing the buds, you're not only seeing the flowers that are open and ready for pollination, you're seeing the seed husks and also those branches denuded of all the seeds as well as the extraneous leaves. I find it exquisite. I think it's a really amazing thing to be able to showcase. And it's something that I treasure to in seeing in my yard. All right, so one other thing is soil biology. As a biologist, soil biology I think is extremely important. So this is a list of the major soil types that we have here in Florida. And as you can see, it is crazy diverse. We have a really varying number of substrates that we're talking about. We also have various densities. It's something that's amazing that we in one state can manage to showcase essentially different biomes, right? Just this is the material, these are the substrates. So why is it that soil biology is so key? Well, you take these substrates and then you actually look into what's the function of soil, right? So if you have erosion control, let's pick. So this is going to be on underneath soil-based ecosystem services. Let's go down 3. There's erosion control, and erosion control itself can be linked to habitat provision. It can be linked to soil structure maintenance, also to water cycling, as well as organic matter cycling, right? So that's just general humus formation, so on and so forth. All of that can itself be linked to various soil threats, such as contamination or compaction, biodiversity loss. So when we're thinking about soil biology, we can't just, it's so important because we can't just be thinking about the plants. We also have to be thinking about what it is that's causing the system within which these plants are existing. All right, so what was my starting point on this crazy journey? So this is actually my starting point, sad as it might be. So I started with a brand new build. And because of that, we had, first of all, the builders had clear cut the property. They also had laid down tons of fill dirt around all the new builds. There was lots of misgrading on the plot itself. And then we were required to put down St. Augustine only sod. So we didn't even have the option of changing that out and putting in something that was native there that just was taken away from us. And then lastly, we also had tons of steep slopes on our property. So because of all of these, we actually had multiple areas of standing water as well as flooding, which is very strange to say. And worst of all, the flooding wasn't even just for us. We were flooding other neighbors, which is even more dreadful. So this was my starting point, how is it that I was able to get past this, right? This is what a classic HOA looks like. When you think about them, you think about, well, systems that look exactly alike, very cookie cutter, right? And we also think of lots of lawn. And those are things that we need to teach our neighbors. That just, we have to teach our neighbors that this is not what an HOA needs to look like. Okay, so that was my starting point. So the next part about this was how did I go about learning what it is that I needed to know? I knew there was a lot that I did not know. We had just recently moved to Florida, so I really didn't know anything about how things grew here. I didn't know anything about the natives, so I decided to start teaching myself. I started with, of course, literature searches because I'm a researcher, so that's what I go to first. I also asked around for advice, and then I learned a little bit more about policy. So let's get into it. So one of the sources that I used and I found extremely important was Doug Tallamy's work. And Doug Tallamy, of course, is an entomologist who advocates for home gardens and native landscaping. And the goal is, of course, to preserve insects, birds, and wildlife. And the explanation is that these native plants are actually what link all of our landscapes together. And if you can create landscapes that are more self-sufficient, then you have less maintenance, less irrigation and fertilizer, you have more wildlife, and of course, in my mind, what is most attractive, you have lots of extra volunteer plants, which means these are plants that I don't have to go out and put in myself, but come up on their own. Another source for me was Ginny Stibbolt, who was a botanist and who gave me a very in-depth look as to what it meant to have a multi-tiered planting system. So in this particular example, you have an anchor tree, which is your magnolia, and it provides your nesting and food sources, but then you also have ground cover. So you've got your love grasses, you've got the viburnum, the shiny blueberry, all of those are helping to support the magnolia, to protect the roots, but then also to be able to capture that water and to keep it from becoming runoff, right? So it's also beautiful. It's providing a food source. It's providing ground cover. I mean, all of these are really, this is a very small image, and yet it shows such depth of exactly what's possible if you think and plan your garden out. I also looked at the soil researchers. So, in my mind, what we think of as the microbiota and the mesofauna, right? Those are both extremely important. And if you put them together, you actually end up with very diverse systems in your soil. And that's what's really important, right? Is not only that you've got your good fungi or you've got, your great mites. You got to be able to have everything together within soil in order to have it be um, as comprehensive as possible in order to be able for it to be able to provide as many nutrients as possible to the plants that are growing. All right, so another thing that I researched was accessibility. And when I was doing this, I came across Stephen Cantu, who's actually a master gardener um, in California. So he's linked up with the University of California, if I'm correct. And he posited this idea of universal design, where in which you have a composition that can be accessed, understood, and used to the greatest possible extent by all people, regardless of their situation. He then took it one step further and he did something, or he created something that he calls FIG, which is friendly, inclusive gardening. And so the goals are to have equitable use, to have flexibility in use, have it be simple and intuitive, perceptible, let there be a great tolerance for error, low physical effort, and also be able to fit the size and space that you have around you. So when you're doing this, you need to be able to consider that you've got movement, so people moving, plants moving, volunteering. You've also got, you know, wildlife going around. You have you've got to consider your measurements. So make sure that you know what it is that you are working with. Materials, where in which can you do something where by switching a material out, you've actually made it more accessible? For example, as people get older, they often have a hard time maintaining, for example, wood, which might need to be treated in order for it to be usable in a garden, like either as a boundary or for a raised bed. Whereas if they switched over to a material such as cement or rock pavers, for example, those are all things that require less maintenance. So something like that can reduce your it can increase your accessibility by reducing the actual effort necessary to maintain the properties. There's also the question of your motivation, like what is the motivation to be in the garden? And also, finally, of course, what is necessary in order to maintain your garden? Um, while many people would enjoy being in a system in which you are surrounded by, let's say that you grew up with roses, you want to be surrounded by roses all the time. That's a wonderful idea. And that can possibly happen if you grow those roses in a pot inside an enclosed area, right? It's less likely to happen if you try and grow those roses outdoors in Florida in the middle of all of our various weather systems. So thinking about maintenance is actually really important when you're considering accessibility, right? You want it to be able to be an ease of use for everybody, no matter what their situation might be. Okay. For advice, I actually did two things that not everybody has to do, but this was my personal journey. One thing I did is I went to a lot of native plant nurseries, and then I proceeded to walk through those nurseries at different times. And I'm not just talking about different times of the day, I'm also talking about different weeks and even different seasons. The reason is that gave me a chance to see what it looked like when I had a mass of a particular plant versus a single plant sitting on its own, right? I also got a chance to see what it looked like with different colors. I got to see what the heights would be like if I, pictured them all together. And also, a lot of individuals have issues with the idea that native plants can often be scrubby, which is very true. Native plants often can they can be a little leggy. They are not as classically beautiful, I guess, it is a landscape material. But that scrubbiness can actually work in our favor. So, for example, if I choose to have a single beautyberry in my yard, that beautyberry can look very sculptural. Or if I have a massive beautyberry, right? Let's say 15 or 20 of those plants in a row, then I've got something that's going to be very overwhelming with color, with vivid overlaps. It's going to be covered with wildlife. So it's not that one is better than the other. It's just that you've got to see what works best for you. I have both. I have things that are massed, and I also have things that are standing alone. Because, for example, for me, I have a beautyberry that's standing alone. The reason is I wanted that sculptural aspect. I wanted kind of the branches flowing outwards with these beautiful colors and those vibrant berries on them. I wanted to be able to see it as an individual piece. Someplace else, I have partridge peas that I had masked to such an extent that you couldn't actually see past the partridge peas. It was just a wall of yellow. So I found that going through a native plant nursery gave me a chance to be able to actually see what I felt was most effective and appropriate. Now, I also chose to work with a landscape designer, and the reason is I needed to work with someone who could understand that I wanted a multi-year tiered timeline, and I had a limited budget within each year. While it would have been lovely to go forth and just do it all in one fell swoop, that is not the way my wallet actually worked out. Also, I wanted to see what the plants look like as they grew. So I wanted to be able to make changes and shifting of system or shifting of the system as time went on. So I found a landscape designer and I was able to actually get that kind of tiered system in place. And you'll see in my proposals exactly how that came about. Also, I wanted a landscape designer because I needed somebody that understood and was dedicated to maintaining healthy soil biomes and also the waterways. Okay, so this is the part that's I call making nice with the neighbors. So you've done all this research, you've put together your plans, you've got an idea of what it is you want to do. Well, how is it that you can actually get it into place within an HOA? So the way I found was most effective for me was, first of all, know your legal hammers, right? Know your Florida statutes, understand the regulations, and also the watershed requirements for your area. Be ready to provide full documentation for any proposal that you put forward to an HOA. HOAs are working within their own set of rules and regulations, right? So the more documentation you give them, the better off it is for you, because working native landscaping into an HOA is not something that is seen very often. So the more documentation you can give to them, the more explanation of the plants, the reason why you're doing it, the colors. I mean, just give them as much as you can, and there will never be a point where in which it's too much information, to be absolutely honest. Also, be ready to leave adequate time for bureaucracy. HOAs run on bureaucracy. Your HOA might only meet once a month, in which case you've got to be ready for the fact that if your proposal is turned down that month, you might have to resubmit and wait another month or two until you can get approval. So just be ready for that. Something I chose to do, which was to attend my HOA meetings. I later became part of the Architectural Review Committee, as well as later still I became a member of the board. But throughout all of it, I talked about my natives. I talked about things that I was interested in. And then I also created a white paper, which I'll show you in a little bit. But these are the last, I guess, three big takeaways when you're dealing with an HOA and when you're trying to have your neighbors be comfortable with the way natives grow and with native landscaping in general. First of all, be ready to keep your landscaping neat and bordered in front, right? It sucks. Unfortunately, that's the way it is. My backyard is much more freewheeling. It's open. In my mind, it's perfect. But I guess to a lot of people, it could be considered overgrown or run over. I have ground covers everywhere. I have sunshine mimosa. I've got my frog fruit. They're growing everywhere. And I want that. I want those quote unquote, not just ground covers. I mean, I need them, and I'll show you later in a bit why I need them. But I can't necessarily have that same ground cover growth or that spread that I have in the back. I can't necessarily have that in the front, right? So in the front, I have things much more curtailed. It's just everything is very bordered. Also, let people spray their own lawn. I personally don't believe in fertilizers. I don't like them. I don't like insecticides. So I realize, however, that people will spray their own lawn, but if nothing else, protect your property lines, right? Make sure that people aren't crossing over onto your property lines or misspraying. Do your best. You can't control them, but you can definitely control what happens on your little part. And then the last thing is offer free seedlings to your neighbors. If you have excess of anything, especially things that are, in Florida, people have seen a lot of muley grass, for example. They know what muley grass is. So I offer muley grass to everyone. If people are making any changes to their landscaping in their yards, I offer them seedlings. I have given tours in my backyard and walked people through and pointed out various things and said, hey, here's how it is, shown them pictures of what it looks like in a year or two when it fills out, for example. But I then proceed to give away as many seedlings as I possibly can to my neighbors. And I think all of these have paid off for me. Okay, getting into policy, here's the one, which is our big hammer. And remember, please don't pull us out unless you need to with your HOA, but it is there for you to use should you need it. Essentially, it is a Florida-friendly landscaping statute, right? So it limits HOAs from prohibiting homeowners from adopting such landscaping practices. It's a little bit loosey-goosey in its terminology. Unfortunately, it doesn't necessarily say that the natives specifically are the best or the only way to do it. That's all right. Doesn't have to be only natives in your yard, right? I don't have only natives. I have predominantly natives, but I have a lot of non-natives too. So this is the biggest hammer, right? Be sure to know this. and know that it exists so that when you go forward and read your HOA regulations, by the way, please read it all. Read every single word you can get your hands on, from your CCRs, which might be your covenants, to your guidelines through your architectural review committee. Whatever you can get your hands on that's written down, please read it over. And remember that these regulations can often be at cross purposes, so they may require clarification. So in that point, you want to talk to a board or design committee member for ideas on how to present your landscaping proposals. So I'm not saying that the board or design committees know anything about natives. I'm not suggesting that they do. However, they do know on how they want the community to look like, right? So they can explain to you that, hey, this might work, this might not work. Such and such looks a little crazy. Maybe could you do it here or do it there? They have an idea of that, and they might help you be able to figure out what might work best for your HOA. All right. And also, yes, ask questions. Please ask questions, as many questions as you possibly can before and during your proposal process. Because the more questions you ask, the more information you have, and the better chance you have of getting your proposals through, but also of being able to educate your neighborhood. Okay. Speaking of education, this is a white paper that I drew up for my neighborhood, and this was to discuss how to improve our common areas. So in this particular situation, I was trying to explain that we could reduce our water and fertilizer as well as our maintenance costs. And described these are the plants that I think might work. The information that I gathered was just online, to be absolutely honest, but I was able to put together a number of different items that I thought would work for my subdivision. So, the HOA, I think, appreciated it because it gave them a chance to see that natives are not just overgrown monstrosities, but they can actually be very beautiful and very helpful plantings. Okay, so what is the summary that I learned from all of my various types of research? I realized that I had three major goals, which were to improve my drainage, to support my soil ecosystem, and also to support universal design. So I had a bunch of action plans. As you can see, there's a bit of overlap in a couple of them. But the biggest one I'd like to just point out is this was my goal. This is my set of goals, right? For my particular journey. This doesn't necessarily have to be your goals. So your actions might end up looking very different than mine. All right. Oh, sorry. Didn't mean to breeze by there, but I was just going to go to the next part, which is dynamic systems. So this is actually dynamic systems is my fancy way of saying the system that's continuously shifting and changing. All right. So what we have here is these are the various years that I've been working or making the major changes actually to my landscape. And these are the types of projects that I have come up with within each of those years, or I've started and paid attention to. So let me give you a quick rundown of what my proposal, my very first proposal looked like. So this was my very first landscaping proposal. It is, as you can see, a bird's eye view of a proposed install. I had a bunch of plants that I possibly was going to put in. And then what I was able to do was actually create a photoshopped representation of how the front yard would look. I put these two parts together specifically so that we would be able to show that, look, it's not just an image, right? An image being that this is not just the bird's eye view image, but I wanted the neighbors and the board to be able to understand this is what it would look like if it was superimposed over my house. So this was something I chose to do. You don't have to, but this was the first part of my landscaping proposal. And it was denied because I had not read a very important section and had not realized that apparently we couldn't plant anything between the sidewalk and the street. So I had to go back, and this was my updated landscaping proposal. And as you can see, I pushed all the plantings away from the street and onto the far side of the sidewalk, closer to the house. And this submission was actually approved. And so now what I've chosen to do is, and I've highlighted this at the bottom, is I've given the information about the front, back, and sides. This is actually the material that I put down around the plants. So in the front, in order for it to look a little bit more clean, I guess, within or for the HOA, I chose to do crushed coquina shell. In the back, I have pine bark mulch because that's what I prefer my plants to grow in. And I really needed to get that fill dirt to become better, right? I needed to improve that soil. And then on the sides, I put in rock for drainage purposes. But another part of this that I'd like to point out is one thing that I have chosen to do. So I should have mentioned this at the very beginning, but one thing that I've chosen to do is I've chosen to use a meadow system as predominantly throughout my entire yard. So what I mean by that is I want something that I have borders to, but then I'm going to let the season, and I'll have a few anchor plants, but then I'm going to let the seasonal changes of the various wildflowers shift the, I guess, shift the look of it without me actually having to do extra work. So I don't want to be out there moving and trimming and maintaining. I want to actually be enjoying my yard. And I found for myself that the best way to do that is actually to have this kind of meadow look. So as you can see, the kind of image that I have here at the bottom near the sidewalk is kind of representative, right? I have muley grasses for fakahachi kind of as my anchors. And then I've let wildflowers of various type come up around them. So soon after I put in, well, yeah, soon after I put in that landscaping proposal, I also decided that I needed to work on my compost. So I knew that I had to improve that soil health, and the way we could do it is add compost. And fortunately, a lot of us have a number of different types of kitchen scraps, and I wanted to also reduce my landfill, the proportion of my garbage that was going into a landfill. So I decided to look into various types of composting. Now, I unfortunately do not have the ability to utilize a number of the various traditional composting systems, right? Either the piling method, where you then have to go in with a pitchfork and turn it, or just the various barrels. I can't do them, or I can't use them. Majority of the reason is I actually have some mobility issues that prevent me from being able to do that. Okay, so then what did I need from a composting system? So my composting system had to be easy to access, easy to use, and easy to transport. I needed to be able to get it out of the house. So what I chose to do was actually, it's a kitchen composting system called an urban composter, and it's actually an anaerobic bokashi system. So you layer in your scraps, and then you spray on top of it a probiotic spray. And then you continue to add in more layers, and essentially you ferment your scraps. The cool part about it is it has minimal odor, very few pest issues, because nothing can really grow in an anaerobic environment. Well, let me rephrase that. Very few fruit flies can grow in an anaerobic environment. Um, and then also, the cool part about it, for me at least, was that I could use this particular bokashi, anaerobic bokashi system with cooked foods, meat scraps, and even small bones. So I could then just use everything that was coming out of my kitchen, and any sort of scrap material would then go into my compost. It's you get compost tea off of the front of it. The front piece of this particular urban composter has a spigot. You can collect your compost tea, and then after about a week or 2 weeks, depending on how full the system is, it will ferment down, and then you'll have a very nice kind of white mold, which is what you want, but fungal kind of system. Yeah, so you just pretty much have white goat, and then you take it. It's now broken down, and you can dig it into your hole, a hole in the garden. You can dump it into a traditional composting system, or you can put it into a worm system, and then it's much more bioavailable, right? Those nutrients have now been broken down out of those scraps and are much more bioavailable to your plants. All right, so this is the result of both my compost work as well as the landscaping proposal. So I was able to use my natives to improve the drainage. And then I was also able to break up the compacted soil and provide lots of plants for pollination. And then finally, we added, so I mentioned before that we have a steep slope. So our backyard, we have, I'd say maybe 25 feet away from the house is relatively flat. And then it slopes, the rest of the property slopes very drastically downwards. Um, all of that fill dirt, it doesn't allow doesn't allow any sort of water retention. So what we chose to do is rip out all of the grass on the entire sloped area, and then lay down mulch. So we usually have anywhere between 3 and 6 inches of pine bark mulch in that back area. Now that our ground covers have grown to the extent that they have, I don't usually refresh the pine bark mulch in the other parts of the garden, but I do refresh along the top edge of the slope, just because obviously things drift downwards. But that mulch has made a massive difference in the soil health, and my natives have done all the rest of the work for me. And then this is the rest of the results that we get from it. So as you can see here, we have a goldenrod on a goldenrod with a native sweat bee. I also had my wild coffee berries, my gopher tortoise, my friendly gopher tortoise. And then we were able to add in screening and boundary plants, just to be able to give me some division between myself and neighbors who, like I mentioned, they like to spray stuff. I prefer not to. My boundary plants at least keep me from having to worry about that spray traveling or affecting the rest of the garden. And also those boundary plants are usually a little bit more robust. I prefer to use mixed hedges. I use a lot of wax myrtle. I've got Simpson stopper, some firebush here and there for color and for beauty. Um, and pretty much anybody else that likes to volunteer. So I've got some saltbush. And so those hedges, like I said, they give me screening and they also give me a little bit of a boundary, right? A little bit of protection before those, whatever the neighbors are doing, before it affects my other wildflowers. Usually the hedges can kind of dissipate the effect. And then in the front here, you can see that this is what this is what the new beds can look like as they fill in. As I mentioned, as you get, as you look at the image as it gets closer to the street, you can see that's the imagery that I usually have, or that's how I usually keep my bed, where it looks like a meadow, right? It's got grasses everywhere, and then it's got wildflowers growing up. It's just, I find it easier because I find it to be another boundary, right? It allows me to present my native plants, but without having to actually um, maintain them. What's the best way to say that? I guess that is the best way to say it. So I have to do very little maintenance on a meadow. A meadow kind of takes care of itself. It reseeds. It's got seasonality, so the colors are shifting. It's the neighborhood likes to talk about what colors are coming up at various points in time. People come down and, well, honestly, they take pictures of their dogs in front of the various flower groups. So in my mind, it all works. All right. The next proposal I put in was for accessibility. This is a blueprint, which is showing you the sidewalk expansion, a screened porch, and a raised bed that we decided to put in, as well as staircases. So the staircases were designed in order to allow for somebody with a walker to actually put the walker in front of them, lock the walker in place, and then safely step down into the next stair. So the stairs themselves are very shallow. So it's not a very far drop from one stair to the next. They're also very wide, as you can imagine. It has to be wide enough for a walker to go down and to be locked in place. And that is something that I chose to do, right? In order to allow for the most accessibility for the stairs. I figured if I was going to be using any part of that slope for gardening, I would like it to also be easy to access. And not everybody can get down a slope, especially not a slope covered in mulch, pine bark mulch. So the raised bed, that's actually an idea that I had to create a safe place for me to be able to start seedlings, very native seedlings, as well as to grow things like lettuces that just don't do so well with all of the bunnies in my backyard chomping on things. So I chose to put my raised bed underneath my screened porch. And then the sidewalk actually is ADA compliant because it's wide enough and supportive enough for individuals with motorized wheelchairs to be able to travel on it. So the downside of putting in something in the tiered method that I chose to do for my landscape, the downside is when you do a tiered system, sometimes you have to yank out stuff. So by putting in that accessibility proposal, I now had to revamp the plants and the plantings that we had in the backyard. So these were the major areas that were affected by the proposal. Um, and this is what it looked like when we were putting these items in. So as you can see, we've got those ADA compliant sidewalks. Our sidewalks are 4 feet wide. The staircases, as I mentioned, were large enough and shallow enough to be able to take a walker down them. And then our raised bed is actually ADA compliant in and of itself. So it's an H shape where the edges are 3 feet high. The whole system is open to the ground underneath. So anything that I do will actually start, obviously I'm trying to keep the soil as healthy as possible. And part of that is just, I figured if I kept my raised bed open to the ground underneath, I would then be utilizing any of the fungi and the microbes that already exist in my soil, right? I'd then be able to utilize them in that raised bed.
Hey, Sam,
So, oh,
I'm
yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to give a quick time check. We are at the hour, so we'll definitely finish up
Oh,
the presentation. And I want to let everyone know that the full presentation will be available, and we'll send you that email when the recording is available. But we may have some people who have to jump off at this
no,
point.
no, of course. I appreciate this. I'm so very sorry. I do have a tendency to natter on. So I will get through the rest of these much faster. But I apologize to anybody who has to leave. I'm very sorry for going over time. But okay, so the next proposal that I put forward was a fence and landscaping proposal. We had at that point in time gotten a pet, so I had to remove pet hostile plantings. And then I also chose to update plantings that were too successful or were not useful at all. So this is another bird's eye view of the new beds. There were a number of them that got increased, and we had a bunch of new plants that came in. So that was super exciting. Lots of different colors came into play. And this finally, now we get to the beautiful part. So this is actually what we have. So as I mentioned, the lower right-hand side, you can see this is that meadow setup I was talking about. In this particular image, I've got some seaside gentian going. We've got blanket flower in the far corner, if I'm correct. I've got some twin flower kind of growing underneath all of it. So, and then goldenrod in the back. To me, I find that very beautiful. And like I said, it's very, very easy to maintain because it's a meadow. Things grow as they will, and I just make sure that there's a border and that the border is maintained, and that's all I really have to do. So these are the kinds of plantings that I was able to put in the front. Coral honeysuckle, for example, is a very vigorous grower. I chose to put in a pot and to grow it up a trellis in order to keep it a little bit more contained and also to be able to show off all those beautiful blossoms. All right. I was talking a little bit about the partridge pea situation. That seasonality, so the figure 30, that's actually shots of the same area, but a couple of months apart, right? So when the partridge peas were going crazy, you can't see anything but the partridge peas. After a short period of time, they died off, and my black-eyed Susans came up. I didn't have to do any work. It just all is there. But as you can see, I keep the border as neat as I possibly can and just let whatever flowers want to come up, they can come up. We also had some beautiful rattlesnake master and false rosemary. So we've had a chance to have some glorious colors. I also maintain a freedom yard or freedom lawn, sorry, in our backyard. And that's where things really kind of go crazy. So we've got, as you can see around this staircase, I've got wild petunia, frog fruit, and it's in vast profusion. We've got the magnolia, scarlet sage grows underneath it, the tropical sage, sorry. And then we've got a common plantain kind of plopping up in the middle of nowhere, but I find it to be an exquisitely sculptural plant, as well as the sunshine mimosa that pops up around it and some spiderwort. So just a very generous smattering of various types of plants. So I think to me, the landscape is very successful as a whole. So something else I was looking into was a worm composting system. As I mentioned, the urban composter, the Bokashi system, gave me material that I could then use in a worm farm or worm composter. I chose to do the subpod, which is actually an in-ground composting system, in which you add the worms, you add the material, and then the worms are able to go in and out freely from this plastic box. And then this brings me to one of the most recent projects that I chose to do, which was actually the aquascape, which was a water conservation system. So this is a rainwater capture system. It's actually linked to our gutters, and it grabs and stores in a reservoir the water from the gutter, and then it also uses that same water to provide a fountain. In our case, we chose to do a stream so that wildlife could utilize it. And then we have an overflow area that's actually a rain garden. So we have a 240-gallon pondless waterfall that, as I mentioned, ties directly to our gutters. We have two pumps with it, one that recycles the water within the waterfall, and then the second one that actually provides water to a spigot for hand watering. So I can utilize those 240 gallons whenever I want to. So this is actually what it looks like in our backyard. And as I mentioned, I've got beautyberry, I've got those non-natives there too, but around the stream itself, I chose to plant natives, and I have some water plants that are actually in the water itself. So, yeah. So, in conclusion, so I just wanted to point out that within the restrictions of an HOA, it is possible to have an efficient, accessible, sustainable, beautiful, and impactful garden. Thank you all very much for your time. I really appreciate having a chance, and my apologies once again for running over. So I'd be happy to take any questions at this time.
Great. Thank you so much. And, we appreciate your time. And I know for myself, even when I'm talking about stuff like this, I get real excited and I can go on forever too. So no worries on that end. Because we are at time, I think that there is one super quick question that I'll pose, and then we can follow up with the one other question we currently have. But can you just suggest, what your options are if your HOA refuses your landscape plan?
Okay, so if they refuse your landscape plan, first off, I'd talk to your board members, your committee members, and try and find out why they decided to refuse that plan. And then honestly, like if they continue, if they refuse to give you information in which you are able to make a resubmission that makes sense, unfortunately, you will have to pull out the Florida statutes, right? And that's why I said read over your HOA regulations very, very carefully. Talk to as many people as you possibly can. And then, but know that those Florida statutes exist for a reason. And that reason is we are allowed to have Florida-friendly landscaping. We're allowed to have native landscaping. As long as you can show that it can be done in a beautiful way, one that fits within what the community is known for or would like to present, then there should be no reason why you'd be rejected. But honestly, just realize that you do have multiple layers by which to approach. And
Awesome.
also always use associations like the Wildflower Foundation, right? Make use of the fact that you have a foundation that you're a member of that will be able to back you and explain to you where you might be able to improve either your presentation or give you more information to help bring your board along. So always use your foundation membership.
Great. Yeah, and that's an area where I would also suggest your local FMPS chapter, because you may
Yes.
have people that are in your area. We, of course, are happy to provide resources and information, but we don't have those local connections. So, like with a chapter like the FMPS does. So that is a great use of your chapter as well. See if anyone else has dealt with that and had success or challenges. So I think that's a wonderful note to wrap today up on. Again, thank you, Saumya, for your super inspiring and informative presentation. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. And we hope to see you back on April 16th for getting familiar with plant families with Dr. Folsom. Have a great afternoon, everyone.